The shuttle dropped through the clouds of Valorous Prime, and Commander Lissa Vance pressed her face to the window like a child. The station world spread below her, a massive ring of metal and glass floating in the golden light of 3 suns. Towers rose from the ring like teeth. Ships moved between them like insects. It was beautiful in a cold way, the way a knife is beautiful. She touched the saber at her hip without thinking. The weight of it calmed her. It had belonged to her grandmother, and her grandmother's mother before that. Going back 6 generations to old Earth, the blade was simple steel, the handle wrapped in leather that had been replaced many times. It was not fancy. It was not powerful, but it was hers. The shuttle landed with a soft bump. Lissa gathered her bag and walked down the ramp into the Galactic Academy of Martial Sciences. The academy was old. 10,000 years old, they said. Species from across the galaxy sent their best warriors here to learn, to train, to become masters of combat. Lissa was the first human to ever attend. Earth had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. They were still newcomers, still primitives in the eyes of many. A tall creature waited for her at the bottom of the ramp. It stood on 4 legs and had 2 arms that ended in sharp claws. Its head was like an insect's head, with large dark eyes and mandibles that clicked when it spoke. This was a Silithine, Lissa knew, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. "Commander Vance," the creature said. Its voice was dry and rasping. "I am Master Kethvoran. I will be your primary instructor. Welcome to the Academy." Lissa bowed. "Thank you, Master. I am honored to be here." "I am honored to be here." Kethvoran's dark eyes moved down to the saber at her hip. His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "What is that?" "A sword, Master. A family weapon. I carry it for tradition." "How quaint." Kethvoran turned and began walking. Lissa followed. "You will find that we have moved beyond such things here. The Academy teaches the ion arts. Energy weapons. Clean, efficient, absolute." They walked through corridors of white stone and blue light. Other students passed them, creatures of all shapes and sizes. A massive being covered in thick plates of natural armor. A slim figure with 4 arms and skin like silver water. A floating sphere with dozens of eyes. All of them wore the same thing on their hands. Sleek gauntlets that hummed with power-on pulse gauntlets. Lissa had read about them. They fired concentrated bursts of ionic energy that could vaporize flesh, melt metal, burn through almost anything. They were the standard weapon of galactic civilization. Everyone used them. Everyone. Kethvoran led her to a large hall where dozens of students had gathered. At the center of the hall stood a target dummy made of thick metal plates. "Observe," Kethvoran said. He raised one clawed hand. The gauntlet on it glowed bright blue. A bolt of energy screamed from his palm and struck the dummy. The metal did not melt. It simply ceased to exist. A hole the size of a head appeared in the dummy's chest, the edges glowing orange. The students made sounds of approval. Kethvoran lowered his hand. "This is the ion pulse," he said. "Fast, powerful, unstoppable. There is no defense against it. No armor can block it. No shield can stop it." His eyes moved to Lissa again, to her sword. "And certainly no primitive metal blade can stand against it." Some of the students laughed. A large creature with gray skin and tusks made a snorting sound. A slim being with too many joints in its arms whispered something to its neighbor, and they both looked at Lissa with what seemed like pity. Kethvoran walked toward her. He stopped very close. Lissa could smell him now, a dry smell like old paper. "You cannot stop ion with metal," he said. His voice was soft, almost kind, the way a teacher speaks to a slow student. "That blade at your hip is a relic. A toy. A reminder of how far your species still has to come. I suggest you leave it in your quarters from now on. You will have no use for it here." Lissa looked up at the tall insectoid. Her face showed nothing. "Yes, master." "Good. Find your seat. Training begins tomorrow." Lissa bowed and walked to the back of the hall. She sat in an empty seat and watched as Kethvoran continued his demonstration. More bolts of energy. More vaporized metal. The students watched with hungry eyes, eager to learn, eager to master these weapons of light and fire. Lissa watched too. But she was looking at something different. She was watching how the bolts moved, how they traveled through the air, how they struck their targets. That night, after the other students had gone to sleep, Lissa walked through the empty corridors of the academy. She had studied the maps. She knew where she was going. The archives were deep in the station, behind doors that required special permission to open. Lissa had that permission. She was, after all, a cultural liaison. She was supposed to study, to learn, to understand. The archive was vast and dark and quiet. Holographic files floated in the air like ghosts. Lissa walked among them, searching until she found what she was looking for. Old records. Very old, from the time when ion weapons were first invented. From the time when the galaxy was learning how to use them. She sat down and began to read. The files told her things that the modern galaxy had forgotten. Ion weapons were not magic. They were science. They followed rules. They had limits. Ion pulses were electromagnetic. They traveled along paths of least resistance. They could be redirected by conductive materials. They could be grounded, sent into the floor or the walls, made harmless. The galaxy had known this once. 10,000 years ago, warriors had carried shields of specially treated metal. They had worn armor that could turn an ion bolt aside. They had known how to fight these weapons, but that knowledge had been lost, forgotten, because why would anyone need it? Ion weapons had won. Everyone used them now. No one fought with physical weapons anymore. The old ways were dead. Lissa touched her saber again. The steel was cold under her fingers. Not dead, she whispered to herself in the darkness of the archive. Just sleeping. She had a lot of work to do. The weeks passed slowly at the academy. Every day was the same. Wake up, train, get beaten, sleep, wake up again. Lissa learned to use the ion gauntlets. She was not bad at them. She could hit targets. She could move and shoot at the same time. She could do all the basic things that the instructors asked her to do. But she was not good. Not like the others. Torvax was a Krorvan, a massive creature with skin like stone and arms as thick as Lissa's whole body. When he fired his gauntlets, the bolts hit like thunder. He never missed. He was strong and fast and brutal, and the instructors loved him. Veli was an Etheri, slim and quick, with silver skin that changed color when she moved. She could fire 6 shots in the time it took most students to fire one. Her accuracy was perfect. She danced through the training exercises like water flowing downhill. Orvex was something else entirely. His species had no name that humans could pronounce. He was small and gray, with large black eyes that never blinked. He did not seem impressive, but his mind worked like a machine. He calculated angles and distances faster than computers. He knew where his enemies would be before they knew themselves. These 3 were the best students in the academy. They were also the ones who laughed at Lissa the most. "Look at the human," Torvax said one day after training. His voice was like rocks grinding together. "She still carries that metal stick. Does she think she will poke someone with it?" Veli made a sound like wind chimes. It was how Netheri laughed. "Perhaps she plans to cook meat on it. I hear humans still use fire for cooking. Very primitive." Orvex said nothing. He just watched Lissa with those black eyes, watching, calculating. She did not like the way he looked at her. Master Kethvaran used Lissa as an example in his classes. Not a good example. Not a good example. He would call her forward and have her demonstrate a technique. Then he would show how a proper student should do it. The difference was always clear. The other students would click and hum and make the sounds of their various species laughing. Lissa said nothing. She bowed and returned to her seat and watched and waited. But at night, when the academy slept, she was busy. She found an old cargo bay that no one used. It was deep in the station, far from the training halls and sleeping quarters. There, alone in the dark, she practiced not with gauntlets. With her saber, she moved through the old forms that her grandmother had taught her. The cuts, the thrusts, the blocks and parries. She had learned these movements as a child on Earth, practicing in her family's small backyard, using wooden sticks because real swords were too dangerous for children. Now she was not a child. And this was not practice. This was preparation. She also studied. Every night, after her physical training, she returned to the archives. She read everything she could find about ion weapons, their history, their physics, their limits. The more she learned, the more she understood. Ion pulses were not unstoppable. They followed laws. They were electromagnetic, which meant they were affected by magnetic fields. They traveled along paths of least resistance, which meant they could be guided. They discharged their energy when they hit conductive materials, which meant they could be grounded. The old warriors had known this. They had built shields and armor that could redirect ion bolts away from their bodies and into the ground. A warrior with the right equipment and the right training could stand against ion weapons, but no one remembered. The knowledge had been buried, forgotten, because the galaxy had decided that ion weapons were perfect, and no one questioned perfect things. Lissa began to modify her saber. Not with technology. The academy would notice technology. She modified it with geometry. She changed the angle of the blade slightly, just a few degrees. She polished the metal until it was like a mirror. She wrapped the handle in new material, something that would insulate her hand from electrical discharge. She tested it carefully, using low-power ion bolts that she generated with stolen equipment. At first, the results were bad. The bolts hit the blade and scattered in all directions. Once, a redirected bolt burned a hole in the cargo bay wall. Once, the discharge traveled up the blade and shocked her so badly that she could not move her hand for an hour. But she kept trying. She adjusted. She learned. Slowly, the blade began to work. She could angle it just right, and the bolt would slide down the metal and discharge into the floor. She could redirect the energy away from her body. She could survive. It was not easy. It required perfect timing, perfect angle, perfect control. If she was wrong by even a small amount, the bolt would hit her and she would die. There was no room for error. But Lissa had always been good at things with no room for error. That was why Earth had sent her here. The weeks became months. Lissa remained an average student in the day. Average with the gauntlets. Average in the exercises. The other students stopped laughing at her because she was no longer interesting enough to mock. She was just the human with the metal stick who would never be great. That was fine. That was what she wanted. One night, she was practicing in the cargo bay when the station's alarms began to scream. Red light filled the corridors. A voice spoke over the communication system, calm and mechanical. Alert, alert. Unknown vessels approaching. All students report to shelter areas. Alert, alert. Lissa stopped her practice. She listened to the alarm. She felt something change in the air, something that made her skin cold and her heart beat faster. She did not go to the shelter areas. Instead, she went to the observation deck. She looked out the great windows at the stars. Ships were coming. Dozens of them. They were black and angular, like broken pieces of darkness moving through space. They surrounded the station like wolves surrounding prey. Lissa did not know who they were, but she knew, somehow, that everything was about to change. She touched her saber. The blade was ready. So was she. The Holopact came with fire and silence. Their ships did not announce themselves. They did not demand surrender. They simply attached to the station like parasites and cut through the walls with plasma torches. By the time the Academy's defenders reached the breach points, the enemy was already inside. Lissa watched from the observation deck as chaos spread through the station. She could hear it on the communication channels. Screaming, shouting, the high whine of ion weapons firing. And then, worse than all of that, silence. She moved through the corridors carefully, staying in the shadows, listening. She passed a group of Academy guards running toward the fighting. Their gauntlets glowed with power. Their faces were hard with determination. Minutes later, she found them lying on the floor. They were not dead. They were restrained, their hands bound behind their backs, their gauntlets removed. Standing over them were creatures in black armor. The Holopact soldiers were of many species. Lissa saw Kravan and Netheri and others she did not recognize. But they all wore the same armor, black and smooth, and they all had the same symbol on their chests, an empty circle. One of them raised an iron gauntlet and fired at a wall, demonstrating something to the others. The bolt left the gauntlet and flew toward the soldiers in black armor. It never hit them. Instead, the bolt scattered. It broke apart into 1,000 tiny sparks that flew in all directions and faded into nothing. The soldier who had fired laughed. Lissa understood. Ion dispersion fields. The black armor projected fields that scattered any ion bolt before it could hit. The energy simply broke apart and disappeared. The Academy's weapons were useless. She watched as more Academy guards were captured. They fired and fired, but their bolts did nothing. The packed soldiers walked through the rain of energy like it was gentle sunlight. They struck the guards with physical weapons, clubs and sticks, and dragged them away. The irony was not lost on Lissa. The Academy had abandoned physical weapons because they were primitive. Now physical weapons were the only things that worked. She moved deeper into the station. The fighting was everywhere. Students tried to resist. Torvax charged a group of packed soldiers, firing his gauntlets with all his strength. The bolts scattered harmlessly. The soldiers beat him to the ground and bound his massive arms with chains. Veli tried to run. She was faster than the soldiers, but there were too many of them. They cornered her and knocked her down and dragged her away. Orvex did not fight. He calculated the odds, saw that they were hopeless, and surrendered without resistance. The soldiers seemed almost disappointed. Master Kavaran led a final defense at the main training hall. A dozen instructors stood with him, their gauntlets blazing. They fired everything they had at the advancing packed soldiers. Nothing worked. Kethvarm was wounded in the leg. He fell. The soldiers bound him and laughed at him and kicked him as he lay on the ground. The great master of the Academy, helpless as a child. Lissa watched all of this from hiding. She saw her classmates dragged away. She saw her teachers defeated. She saw everything the Academy had built collapse in a single hour. The pack soldiers herded their prisoners toward the docking bays. Lissa followed, staying in the shadows, moving silently. She counted the soldiers. She studied their positions. She looked for weaknesses. The ion dispersion field stopped energy. They scattered electromagnetic pulses before they could strike. But Lissa had watched carefully. She had seen the pack soldiers hit the guards with clubs. She had seen them strike with their hands. Physical objects passed through the fields, like they were not there, because why would the field stop physical objects? No one used physical weapons. The fields were designed to stop ion bolts, and ion bolts were the only weapons that existed. The Pact had never needed protection from anything else. Lissa drew her saber. The blade caught the red emergency lights and glowed like it was already bloody. She stepped out of the shadows. There were 3 Pact soldiers at the end of the corridor. They saw her immediately. One of them raised his gauntlet and fired without hesitation. The bolt screamed toward Lissa's chest. She angled her blade. Just right. Just perfect. The bolt hit the steel and slid down its length like water on glass. It discharged into the deck plating at her feet. Sparks flew. The metal hissed and smoked. But Lissa was untouched. The soldier stared. His eyes went wide with confusion. Lissa moved. She crossed the distance in 3 heartbeats. Her blade came up. The first soldier fell with a red line across his throat. The second raised his arms to block, but the saber cut through them and continued into his chest. The third tried to run. He did not get far. Lissa stood in the corridor surrounded by bodies. Her breathing was steady. Her hands did not shake. She had trained for this. Not at the academy. At home, on Earth, where humans had been killing each other with blades for 10,000 years. She cleaned her saber on one of the fallen soldiers and continued toward the docking bay. Galaxy had forgotten the old ways. The Hollow Pact thought they were invincible because they had made themselves immune to the only weapons anyone used. They had never considered that someone might use something else. Lissa smiled. It was not a nice smile. She had a lot of teaching to do. The station had become a maze of fear and blood. Lissa moved through it like smoke, appearing from shadows and vanishing again before anyone could react. The Pact soldiers had spread through every level, confident in their immunity, certain that nothing could touch them. They learned otherwise. A group of 6 soldiers guarded a checkpoint where prisoners were being processed. They stood casually, joking with each other, their ion gauntlets hanging loose at their sides. Why would they need to be alert? Their armor made them untouchable. Lissa came at them from above. She had climbed through maintenance shafts and dropped from a ceiling panel, her saber already moving. 2 fell before any of them understood what was happening. A third raised his gauntlet and fired point blank. The bolt slid off her angled blade and burned a hole in the wall behind her. Her return stroke took his arm off at the elbow. The remaining 3 tried to run. None of them made it to the door. The prisoners at the checkpoint were Academy students, young creatures from a dozen different species. They stared at Lissa with wide eyes, unable to understand what they had just witnessed. "Can you fight?" Lissa asked. Most of them shook their heads. They were students, not soldiers. They had trained with gauntlets, but gauntlets were useless here. But one of them nodded. A young Orvex, smaller than the one Lissa knew, with the same black eyes. "I can calculate trajectories," she said. "If you give me a weapon with physical projectiles, I will not miss." Lissa smiled. She picked up one of the fallen soldier's sidearms. Not an ion weapon. A chemical projectile thrower, old technology, probably carried as a backup. She handed it to the young Orvex. "Find other prisoners. Free them. Get them to the escape pods on level 7. Do you understand?" The young Orvex took the weapon. Her eyes were cold and steady. "I understand." Lissa moved on. The corridor to the main docking bay was long and straight. A bad approach. The Pact had stationed 20 soldiers there, creating a wall of bodies and weapons. They had heard about the attack. They were ready. When Lissa appeared at the far end of the corridor, they all fired at once. 20 iron bolts screamed toward her. A river of blue light and burning heat. Enough energy to vaporize a tank. Enough power to kill 100 humans. Lissa ran toward them. Her blade moved in patterns that she had practiced 10,000 times. Angle and redirect. Ground the energy. Keep moving. Do not stop. Do not think. Just move. The bolt slid off her saber and discharged into the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Sparks exploded around her. The air itself seemed to burn. But she kept coming closer and closer, until she was among them. Then it was chaos. The pack soldiers had never fought an enemy at close range. They had never needed to. Their weapons worked at distance, and nothing could survive long enough to reach them. They had forgotten what combat looked like when bodies collided and blades cut flesh. Lissa had not forgotten. Her species had spent its entire history learning these lessons. Every generation of humans had taught the next how to kill with hands and blades and teeth. It was ugly knowledge. Shameful knowledge. The kind of thing that civilized species abandoned. But it was also power dodge. She moved through the soldiers like a blade through water. Her saber rose and fell. Bodies dropped. Screams filled the air. The soldiers tried to use their gauntlets, but she was too close, too fast. They tried to grab her, but she was never where they expected her to be dot in 90 seconds. It was over. Lissa stood in the corridor surrounded by fallen enemies. Her uniform was torn. Her arms were burned from deflected energy. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, mixing with sweat and dripping into her eyes. But she was alive. And the way to the docking bay was open. She found Master Keth Vorn inside, bound and kneeling with the other captured instructors. His wounded leg was bleeding badly. His dark insect eyes were dull with pain and shame. When he saw Lissa, those eyes widened. "You," he whispered. "The human." Lissa cut his bonds. "Can you walk?" Yes, I think so." He stared at her blade, at the blood that covered it. How did you do this?" Later, she helped him to his feet. "We need to free the others." The prisoners were held in rows throughout the docking bay. Hundreds of them. Students, instructors, station workers. The pact had planned to take them all as slaves. Lissa began cutting bonds. Others helped when their hands were free. Soon the docking bay was filled with free prisoners, confused and frightened, but alive. Torvax found her. The big Krovan still had chains around his arms, the metal links too thick for Lissa's blade. "Human," he said. His voice was different now. No mockery, no contempt. Something like respect. "What do? "We fight back," Lissa said. "Physical weapons only. Clubs, pipes, anything solid. Their fields do not stop physical objects." Understanding dawned on Torvax's face. His massive hands curled into fists. "I need no weapons. My hands will be enough." Veli appeared beside him, silver skin pale with stress. "The escape pods. We should run." "No." Liz's voice was hard. "They still control the station. They still have ships around us. If we try to run, they will shoot us down. We have to take back the station first." "Impossible," Orvex said. The older one, a calculating one. His black eyes studied Lissa with new interest. "There are hundreds of them. We have no weapons. We have everything we need." Lissa pointed at her saber. The galaxy forgot how to fight without energy weapons. The Holopact thought that made them invincible. They were wrong. She looked at the freed prisoners. Students who had laughed at her. Instructors who had dismissed her. Masters who had called her blade a toy. "I know this is not what you trained for," she said. "I know this is not what you expected. But right now, your training is useless. Your weapons are useless. The only thing that will save us is the oldest form of combat in the universe. Physical, brutal, real." She raised her bloody saber. "Who is with me?" For a moment, no one moved. Then Torvax stepped forward. Then Veli. Then Orvex. Then others, more and more, until the entire docking bay was ready for war. Lissa smiled her cold smile. Good. Now let me tell you how we are going to take back this station. The counterattack spread through the station like fire. Torvax led the main assault. The massive Krovan did not need weapons. His stone-hard fists broke through armor like it was paper. Packed soldiers who had felt invincible moments before found themselves lifted off the ground and thrown into walls. Their ion dispersion fields could not help them. Nothing could help them. Veli led a team through the ventilation systems. The Netheri was fast and silent, and she taught the others to move the same way. They dropped on the packed soldiers from above, striking with pipes and metal bars, vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Orvex coordinated everything. He had found the station's communication system and taken control of it. Now he directed the freed prisoners like pieces on a game board, sending them where they were needed, warning them of enemy positions, guiding them to victory. The Holopack did not understand what was happening. Their soldiers reported impossible things. Enemies who did not fall when shot. Weapons that could not be stopped. Monsters who appeared from nowhere and killed without warning. They had conquered 100 stations. They had taken thousands of prisoners. They had made themselves immune to every weapon in the galaxy, but they had never faced humans. Lissa fought her way toward the command center. She knew that the pack leader would be there, controlling the operation, giving orders. If she could reach him, she could end this. The corridors grew more crowded with soldiers as she got closer. These were not the casual guards she had killed before. These were elite warriors, the best the pact had. They wore heavier armor. They carried multiple weapons. They moved with the confidence of creatures who had never lost a fight. Lissa killed them anyway. Her arms were tired. Her blade was growing heavy. Every swing took more effort than the last. But she kept moving, kept fighting, kept pushing forward. That was what humans did. They did not stop. They did not surrender. They kept coming until they won or died. She burst through the final door and into the command center. The room was large and circular, filled with holographic displays showing the battle throughout the station. Standing in the center was a single figure. A Netheri, tall and scarred, with silver skin that had turned gray with age. He wore no armor. He carried no ion weapon. Instead, coiled around his arm, was a thin line of darkness that seemed to move on its own. "Commander Vance," the figure said. His voice was smooth and calm. "I am Solvex. I command the Hollow Pact." Lissa raised her saber. "Surrender. Your soldiers are losing. Your invasion has failed." Solvex smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Yes, I can see that." "Very impressive." When I heard the reports, I did not believe them. A human with a metal blade, killing my best soldiers. Impossible, I thought. No one remembers the old ways anymore. The line of darkness on his arm moved, uncoiled, extended. Lissa saw now that it was a whip of some kind, thin as a hair, black as space. "But I remember," Solvex said. "I have always remembered. I built the pact on that memory. Ion dispersion fields, because I knew that someday someone might remember too. Physical weapons, because the galaxy had forgotten them." He cracked the whip. The air screamed. Monomolecular wire, 1 molecule thick. It cuts through anything, metal, stone, flesh, bone, anything. He began to circle Lissa. She turned with him, keeping her saber between them. "I wondered when someone like you would appear," Solvex continued. "Someone who remembered. Someone who understood. I have been waiting, planning, preparing." His gray eyes gleamed with something like joy. "Thank you for coming. I have wanted to test myself against a true warrior for so long." He attacked. The whip moved faster than Lissa could see. It cut through the air with a sound like tearing silk. She raised her saber to block, but the whip curved around it. Pain exploded across her left arm as the wire cut through her sleeve and into her skin. She fell back. Blood ran down her arm. The cut was deep. Solvex laughed. "Your blade cannot block my whip. It moves around obstacles. It finds flesh." He attacked again. Another cut, this time across her thigh. "You are brave, human. But bravery is not enough. Not against me." Lissa gritted her teeth. He was right. Her saber was designed to deflect energy, not to fight physical weapons. The whip was too fast, too flexible, too deadly. But she was human. And humans had learned something in their long history of violence. They had learned how to take pain. How to keep fighting when their bodies screamed for them to stop. How to turn their own blood into fuel for one final push. She stopped trying to block. Instead, she moved forward. The whip came at her face. She ducked, felt it slice across her shoulder. Another swing, this one at her legs. She jumped, felt it cut her ankle. More pain, more blood. But she was closer now, closer. Solvex's eyes widened. He had never seen anyone advance through his whip. Everyone tried to retreat, to block, to escape. No one came forward. No one accepted the pain just to close the distance. The whip swung at her chest. Lissa did not dodge. She let it wrap around her left forearm, felt the wire cut through cloth and skin and muscle, felt it grind against bone. The pain was incredible. The pain was everything, but the whip was trapped. She pulled. Her mutilated arm screamed. Solvex stumbled forward, pulled off balance. His eyes showed fear now. Real fear. Lissa's right hand drove the saber forward. The point entered just below Solvex's chin and continued upward. She saw the light leave his eyes. She saw his body go limp. She heard the whip fall loose from his dead fingers. Then she fell to her knees, her ruined arm cradled against her chest, her blood spreading across the floor. The battle ended soon after. With Solvex dead and their commander fallen, the remaining pack soldiers surrendered. Torvax and Veli led the cleanup. Orvex coordinated the securing of the station and the capture of the enemy ships. Lissa woke up 3 days later in the medical bay. Her arm was wrapped in regeneration bandages. Her body was covered in smaller cuts and burns. But she was alive. Master Kethvorn stood beside her bed. His wounded leg was healed now, and he stood straight and tall. But his eyes were different, softer, humbler. "Commander Vance," he said, "on behalf of the Academy, I owe you an apology." Lissa tried to sit up. Her arm protested. She lay back down. "For what?" "For dismissing your knowledge. For mocking your weapon. For believing that old ways had no value." Kethvorn lowered his head. "You were right. I was wrong. The galaxy forgot something important, and you remembered." Lissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You were right about one thing, Master." Kethvorn looked up. "What?" "You cannot stop ion with metal." She smiled. "Good thing I was not trying to stop it. Just redirect it." Kethvorn made a clicking sound that Lissa now recognized as laughter. Indeed, indeed. 6 months later, the Academy reopened. There was a new course in the curriculum: Primitive Weapons and Asymmetric Warfare. Master Kethvorn taught it personally. Attendance was mandatory. And in the Hall of Honored Weapons, in a case of glass and light, hung a simple steel saber. It was old and worn and stained with blood that could never be fully cleaned. But it was there, the first physical blade to be displayed in that hall in 10,000 years. The plaque beneath it read, "The galaxy forgot. Humanity remembered." Lissa visited it sometimes when her duties allowed. She would stand before the case and look at the blade that had belonged to her grandmother, and her grandmother's mother, and all the generations before. They had carried it through wars and peace, through darkness and light, never knowing why it mattered. Only knowing that it did. Now the galaxy knew too, and they would never forget again.